G'day and welcome back to Talking Leadership. Thanks again for joining me. This is Eric Perez, your podcast host. A fantastic start to the March set of podcasts. Today's guest is the founder and principal lawyer at Equality Lawyers based in Adelaide. I welcomed to the podcast Natalie Wade. A fantastic start to the 2021 March set of podcasts. This podcast in particular was of interest to me in that it really does spell out if you have a passion for something and you're prepared to follow it through, a lot of things can happen and you can change the world around you. And in listening to Natalie's pathway as a leader, you'll get that impression quite quickly and you'll understand what it is to follow what is a passion project. I highly recommend this particular podcast, but I recommend all my podcasts to those who are listening. Again, could not be more thankful for those that are following Talking Leadership. And without further delay, over to Natalie. She is the founder and principal lawyer at Equality Lawyers. Can I welcome to the podcast Natalie Wade? How are you, Natalie?
I'm really well, Eric. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Mate, not a problem, and appreciate you giving up your time to speak with me. So let's start out with the question I always ask my podcast guests to start the ball rolling. Your leadership and its beginnings. Can you take us back where you think this crazy journey of leadership started for you, mate?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on, what we consider to be leadership, doesn't it? I could say to you, Eric, that I was a leader when I was in year 3 and I was the head of the student representative council, or I was a leader when I was bossing my sister around to make her play with me when we were small. But I guess my probably best effort of conscious leadership has been establishing my law firm, Equality Lawyers, here in South Australia. And that really all began from my own lived experience of disabilities. So by way of explanation, Equality Lawyers is a law firm that provides legal services to people with disabilities and their families. And so I am a woman with a physical disability, and my experience really led me to want to provide some leadership around what legal services look like for the disability community. So that all started in about 2019 officially. If you go look up the ABN and whatever, it would be officially July 2019. But the idea started ruminating sometime when I was at law school, and then it faded away while I went off and tried my hand at being a government lawyer, and it came back very predominantly when I did a leadership course in 2018.
Okay, so yeah, that explains how you got to where you got to. So obviously this idea of being a leader in that space in the legal profession and in a very niche subset of that, because I guess when you think about lawyers, and I've got a few very good childhood friends that have entered the legal profession, you think of crim law or commercial law or family law, and they're typically the ones you think about, but you don't really throw your mind to things like disability law. And I'm sure that that's a fascinating area and lots of work for you to do. So I'm sure you've taken on a lot more than you thought you would taking this on. So more power to you for doing it. And it's interesting, and you're not the first one to bring it up. So I know you're not being facetious when you say, well, where does leadership start? I guess sometimes it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, maybe bossing your sister around is probably not considered leadership. Maybe that's just the toing and froing of trying to get the pecking order in a family. But yeah, definitely I agree with you that leadership can start anywhere. And it sounds like to me this was germinating in your mind when you were at university, but you didn't maybe feel you were ready to take the leap. And and please correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were thinking about this at uni, was it because you saw a gap in that market, that space, sorry, not market, sorry, I'm not the right word I'm trying to use here, but that ability to help those in the disability space? Was that something that was always germinating in your mind, or did you read or see some cases yourself that started bringing it home for you?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. And, we often say you can't be what you can't see. And we say that a lot about women in certain industries like agriculture or maths and sciences and even the law. And we say it about all sorts of things where we need more diversity. And for me, I intuitively wanted and knew that there was a need to protect and promote the human rights of people with disabilities in Australia, that we weren't getting a fair go. And I had this incredible privilege to go to law school, to receive a top education at one of Australia's best law schools, and I felt that it would be my absolute honour to marry both my lived experience and my privilege of that education together in one melting pot to be a disability rights lawyer, and a leading one at that. But what I couldn't quite work out, which I think explains the sort of 8-year gap between the story where I went off to state government, is that you just can't be what you can't see. So I didn't know of any other people with disabilities that were lawyers in the disability rights space. And so I wasn't really sure, to be honest, if it was a thing that I could do. Like, if no one else is doing it, maybe there's a really good reason why they're not doing it. Or something. And so,
that's a good way to not do anything in life, mate.
Isn't it?
That one down as because I can hear myself in what you've just said. Then that's a good excuse to not do stuff or put roadblocks in your own way. And if you try and find ways to self-sabotage, and I'm glad that you took the step when you did, because looking at the outline of the things that you've done, and if you don't mind me just going off track just a little bit for those that are listening, Natalie's also worked as an expert advisor on the Disability Royal Commission. You've been a director within housing. You've been the vice president of the Australian Lawyers for Human Rights. I mean, you've got some skin in the game, and so obviously this is an area of passion for you in the legal space. So, what was the tipping point that tripped you into moving from? And I can forgive you for working for state government, because we've all made that mistake. But when you move on and you go and work and do something for yourself in the private sector, what was the thing or factors that made you jump to that next step, if I can ask?
Yeah. So by the time that I had decided that the time had arrived for me to do what that final year law student had dreamt of doing, was a combination of a few things. One was that I had had about 7 years in government practicing as a lawyer. So I'd got some stripes. I learned a lot about my craft and how to do what I do really well. So that's obviously really essential to being a disability rights lawyer, is actually knowing how to be a lawyer. But fundamentally, what I think really did happen in the background was I had the incredible fortune of doing the Governor's Leadership Foundation program here in South Australia, which is a 12-month program for about 40 or 45 people that are either currently in leadership roles, or they want to be leaders, or they have an interest in leadership. And the cohort spend the year about once a month going around different parts of South Australia and being engaged with leading experts in relevant industries and spaces and community. And what a reoccurring issue for me was how absent inclusivity was for people with disabilities throughout the South Australian community. So completely independent of the program, just having that opportunity to sort of poke my head into different industry, different parts of the community, different levels of government and non-government organisations. And I became so aware, just from my own experience, of how the rights of people with disabilities just were still not on the radar at all. And that manifested in the conversations that we were having with leadership, or my ability to physically access places and spaces and whatever. Anyway, at the end of that year, I had long service leave from government, and I said in January to my now husband, I don't want to go back. I either go back and I never leave, or I go back and I hand in my resignation and I do what I always said I would do. I was so unsure, Eric, that I was able to establish a disability rights law firm that I literally rang the Law Society of South Australia in that January and said, is it okay? Is that actually allowed? Like, maybe there's a rule that says you're not allowed. Anyway, they were like, yeah, of course that's fine. Sure, if that's what you want to do. Anyway, I went back to government, handed in my resignation, and away I went.
When you get to that tipping point, that thing about absolutes in people's lives. So when you were saying I either go back forever to government, which didn't sound like was much of an option for you, or I do something else. And yeah, look, it's always good to hear that that there's people in our community that are willing to step up and fill those niche areas where they need to be done. And please, I'm not trying to denigrate what you're doing, but when I say the word niche, all I'm trying to project here is that you saw a need to get out into the community and to provide a service which people are entitled to. It's a human right to be able to get, I would have thought, legal representation. You've obviously gone in and done that. So again, more power to you for doing it. I think we need people like you that get frustrated with, and I again fully understand why you want to move away from state government, but that's another discussion for another time. And it's my issue, not yours. But I guess moving on is a healthy thing to do. And so when you did it, now here's a follow-up for you. Again, please be as candid as you can, or you tell me to ask another question. But did you get any pushback from people when you said you were going down this pathway?
Yeah, so incredibly not as much as you would think. So given that no one had really set up, well, certainly that I know of, had set up a private law firm for people with disabilities and their families, I thought that there would have been more criticism, like constructive criticism, but I sort of was braced for it outside of that conversation with my husband in the safety of our kitchen about it, and my anonymous phone call to the Law Society about if it was okay. I thought, oh my gosh, when I start to tell people, they're going to think this is really, like, they're going to think that this is a terrible idea. For the absolute most part, people were unbelievably supportive. People mostly sort of said, of course you are. Of course that's what you were going to do. And I must admit, I would not have left government for anything else. So I, perhaps unlike you, Eric, by the sounds of it, I didn't have too many skeletons in the closet about how I felt about government. But it was simply that this, like, it had to be done, and I finally had the courage to do it. I did have one person who quite close to me leaving government. So I had about a 5-month lead-in where everyone knew that I was leaving, but I was sort of packing up my job and, sort of moving out. And I did have one person who I thought would have been, I didn't know them before I spoke to them about the firm, but I thought would have been sort of supportive of the concept, notwithstanding any support for me, it's sort of irrelevant, but for the concept of people with disabilities and their families having a private law firm that's established just for them. And this person absolutely did not support it and took the time out of their day to call me to tell me that they didn't support it, and they absolutely were of the view that I should stay in government and just continue on as I was. And it was not a good idea to do what I was about to do. And it was really interesting. I thought that sort of conversation would have annihilated any confidence that I had in the idea. But it was almost one of the most golden moments where I thought, yeah, I absolutely do need to do this, and this is absolutely what I should be doing. It was just such a moment of clarity, but in the most cream pie to the face sort of way.
It's a very, if I can interrupt, it's a very eloquent way of saying something else that I've got in mind when something like is thrown at me. So I know what sort of words I would have used in that situation, but no, that makes perfect sense to me, mate. And look, Just if I can segue a little bit, because I think you've set the groundwork for this, and I'm loving this discussion right now. When you took the decision, you're out there, you're doing your gig as a lawyer, and again, for those listening, you've been working for yourself for about almost 2 years, one year and almost 2 years.
18, 19 months, I think. January is the
Right.
19th month.
So you're very, very new to the game, but obviously, if you're the only one doing it, I'm sure you're going to build that business to be the success. Sorry, I'm trying to find my words here. That everyone would hope that something like this could be. So that road of leadership, Natalie, is it as lonely as people say, or is it as lonely as you make it?
I think it's a bit of both, and I think it depends of what part of leadership we talk about. So I think for me, my role as founder and principal lawyer of Equality Lawyers has two strands of leadership to it. One is I lead the company, and two, so that's like the founder part, and two is that I lead the legal team, and that's the principal lawyer part. And the founder part, where I'm leading the company, I'm driving the strategic growth, I'm scaling the business, I'm pushing us forward, I'm being visionary and operational all at the same time. That part of leadership I don't find to be so lonely, because I have colleagues and peers who are in similar scenarios that I see as often as our busy schedules allow. And so I find a lot of assistance in those friendships and work relationships, so that I sort of am able to somewhat avoid the lonely feeling. The other part of my job, where I am the principal lawyer and I manage a team, or the team at Equality Lawyers, can absolutely be lonely. When you are responsible for staff and you are managing them, but also driving the company and whatever, it can be very, at times, lonely when you're making decisions for the team or you're implementing processes and procedures for the team. That part of leadership I find a little lonely, for sure.
Yeah, and it's not something I haven't heard before, and in fact, maybe the lonely pathway is not the right terminology, but definitely that at the end of the day, you've got to make some decisions, and you've got people that are accountable to you, and then in a lot of ways you're accountable too, because you're the head of the business, you're the one driving where things go. And so in that vein, can I ask, measuring success? What and I know it's early days yet, but you've had you've got a business that's heading for 2 years in operation. That's not a bad thing, given how quickly some businesses set up and then are no longer there. So I think you're going to be here for the long haul. So my question is, again, coming from a layperson, so I don't have a background in the law, but what do you see as your measures of success? And I'm asking this beyond KPIs of making a quid, because obviously if you've been in operation this long, that you're turning over some dollars. But other than monetary, what are the other measures of success for you as a leader?
Yeah, so there are a few parts, and I guess they reflect the different roles that you have as a leader. So as that founder role, success is advancing the rights of people with disabilities in Australia. So just a small goal there, Eric. Something a little tiny. And that really means that people with disabilities and their families in Australia are able to access legal services when they need it by a lawyer that they choose to have. Now, that may be us, it may be another law firm, it may be a community legal service, but what is really important to me and what success looks like to me is that people with disabilities and their families have choice about who their lawyer is and what that lawyer looks like, so whether it's private or public or whatever. So that is success as the founder, and success as the principal lawyer who manages the team and runs the everyday operations of the business. And at this stage of growth, that can look like, writing procedures for the team or performance manager the team to water in the plants. So it could be all of the work. It is about developing a workplace for the team, as big or as little as that may be at any point, that people love to be in. That is truly success, I think, for that part of my leadership, that people, they don't have to necessarily work for me forever or stay with quality lawyers for their whole career, but for however long they are with us, that they say that was one of the best, or if not the best job they ever had. And that is such a culture achievement, and that is what success would be for the business, I think.
Yeah, look, I appreciate that response. In fact, it's I like hearing that as a response from the different leaders that I've spoken to about creating a situation where people really want to be there as opposed to it just being a job. Now, that said, people work in organizations for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes people just want to be there, they do their job and they go home, and that's work is a very basic function to be able to afford the things in life that they want to be able to buy. And so it's a means to an end. And managing that is always going to be a difficult thing, but it sounds like you're on top of it. So let's if we can move away just a little bit, and I think it's related because you let a few things slip there about what you value. Leader capabilities, Natalie. What in your mind are those key leader capabilities that lead to effective leadership and decision making?
I think I don't even know that there are a plural in capabilities. I think there may just be a capability. And in my experience, it's communication. You need to be able to communicate your vision, your message, what you want people to do, what you need them to do, how you want clients to engage you, whatever it is. I think everything that I do where I perceive I'm being a capable leader is when I'm communicating effectively. And that looks, different every day. That can be, verbal communication, it can be written communication. It's with all different audiences and across all different aspects of the company. But I really think for leaders, if you are not able to get across your message, if you're not able to bring a team together and set them with a goal or with their work in a clear and confident way that they're empowered to go forward. If you're not able as a lawyer to let your client know what your advice is or present their case without some degree of clarity, then you're in all sorts of trouble. And so for me, one of the biggest, if not the only, leadership capability is communication. There are other very useful skills that we may have as leaders, such as identifying great talent or managing time or setting great strategic goals and vision. But in my view, Eric, all of that lives and dies with communication.
Yeah, and look, it hasn't been couched to me in those terms, but I find myself not being able to disagree with you. I guess the nuance to the response that you gave, and please correct me if I'm wrong with this assessment of what you've just shared, Natalie, is that in some respects, when you talk about communication, that can be a multifaceted thing. So when you talk about communication, you've got peer-to-peer, your junior staff, your operation staff, and then the clients that you talk to. And I guess from a legal perspective, and I've never had to employ the services of a lawyer, and hopefully I won't have to into the future. But if I do, I've spoken to a few of you now, so I'm not so worried about it. But being able to communicate with people that don't understand the law is a big deal at the best of times. And I'm guessing that when you've got clients with differing labels, differing issues when it comes to the disability space, that communication becomes even more vital. Is that fair call?
Yeah, absolutely a fair call. I think that we not only do we have clients with different abilities to be able to receive that information, and that can look like what it looks like for everyone, and it can look very different all at the same time. But often the news that we're delivering to people is really hard news to hear. So it is difficult of a message to give to them, as well as needing to give it in a way that they're able to receive it. So yeah, it's a complicated path, but one that we have become very skilled at navigating for sure.
Yeah, and look, I guess for those in the professions, and massive amount of respects for teachers, lawyers, accountants, doctors, that as professionals you've got to deliver good and bad and catastrophic news. So if for example someone comes in and think they have a case and they really don't, and they're completely deflated, you can put that on par with telling someone they've been diagnosed with some kind of illness or their health prospects aren't that great. You've got to be able to communicate that so the person really understands where they're at, and that becomes a challenge. So I guess, and this is an interesting thing about doing these podcasts, is that learning about the importance of communication as a core or the most critical leader capability. Give me an idea to write a paper on this stuff, but I think it's considering that as the core leader capabilities is interesting for me. And I'm a very early career researcher. I put in my number of core capabilities definitely communication, but for me the other one is strategic thinking and foresight, and that those human cognitive abilities that we've all got and implement in very different ways are critical to how we operate. So I would say from a layperson looking into the stuff that you've been doing, you must have had some foresight or some looking at possible alternative futures and going, this kind of service doesn't exist, I'm going to create something from nothing. That's a big deal, and I guess that's drawing on that foresight skill, even though you might not look at it that way. And definitely with strategic thinking, how do you get the bits into place? How do you achieve the goals that you want to achieve? I think these things mesh together for me, and this is just definitely a lay opinion coming in from the outside, because running my own business at the level that you have, I've never done myself personally. So I'm in awe of people that do it, because there's that, whether it's a leader or an entrepreneur, that appetite for risk varies between people, and some people would never make that jump, and others can't wait to do it, fail or succeed. They just want to have a go, and we need more of that, not less of that. So not be cowardly like myself, but get out there and make some brave calls and do some things that others aren't doing. Natalie, and this one I ask of all the podcast guests, and I'm very interested to hear your perspective on this. Nature versus nurture. Are leaders born or made in your experience?
Look, I think it will depend on what draws you to them being a leader. I think there is definitely an argument that people are born risk takers. They're born to want to be in charge of something, whether it's their to-do list or a team of 500 people. There are people that have certain personality traits that lend themselves to leadership roles more aptly than others. However, it is, in my view, absolutely something that you can learn. There are courses upon degrees that people can undertake to simply learn the art of leadership. And I think that when you look at the capabilities, whether it's strategy, communication, or time management, whatever it is in leadership, they are all fundamentally skills that people, in my view, are definitely able to learn. The way in which a person interacts with those skills or delivers those skills may vary based on the nature part of the question, but certainly I think you can definitely learn how to be a leader if you want to be that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So final question for you, and this is casting the sort of some hindcasting here, but if you could go to a younger version of yourself, what would you say to yourself about being a more effective leader?
I think I would say not to panic so much. Am I allowed to even say that to my now self? I think as it's so easy when you're in the moment and when you're a bit younger or new to the game, not necessarily young in age, just new to leadership, to overthink a lot and to ruminate on stuff and sort of really try and perfect the particular task that you're doing, whether that's writing a strategic plan, finessing the idea for your startup, or going after funding to bring your idea to life or whatever. And to younger me in business, I would say that there is no version of perfect, and that it is just about getting your hands dirty, getting it, and just get on with it. Always, of course, be safe with it and assess risk like an adult. But yeah, just stop panicking, stop trying to perfect it. It'll all come in time. I'm not the most patient of people, so I think sometimes I need to remind myself that it's not all going to happen today, and it should not have all have happened yesterday. And it's fine for it all to happen in good time, and it all will happen. You just have to, keep chipping away at it sometimes.
That's some pearls of wisdom there, particularly around the patience thing. Again, I know some people in my life that have been down that legal pathway, and for some, patience is just in their DNA. For others, not quite the same way. But yeah, I mean, when you're running a business too, part of that impatience comes from the stress of running a business. So it's perfectly understandable. Natalie, thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you so much for having me. I really love the podcast. It's great to hear from other leaders and hear how people are tackling their leadership in their organisation. So thank you so much for sharing it with the world.
Appreciate the feedback, mate. I'm hoping that more people get to listen to this, because the whole purpose of the podcast is to get not the world according to Eric, but the world of leadership from the experiences of people like yourself. So, mate, I appreciate your time. And for those listening, I've been speaking to Natalie Wade. She is currently the founder and principal lawyer at Equality Lawyers based in Adelaide. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been Talking Leadership. I'll catch you all on the next podcast.